This is College Game Day podcast, dropping on February 26th, a Wednesday. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel here. Miller will join us in just a little bit. But Pete, let's start with college ball a little bit. And this time of year, typically, you're starting to think about spring practices getting going, and then ultimately who's going to put a giant crowd in the stands for the spring game to build some momentum, as Nebraska has done in the past, as Ohio State has done, as Alabama has done. And now the new wave is, we're not going to play a spring game. We don't want to showcase our talent to the poachers out there who might come and get them. What do you think of this? It's not widespread yet, but you can see it coming. It's headed that way, as a number of prominent programs have either said, we're not going to play a game, we're going to do something called a showcase or whatever, rather than to play the traditional spring game.
So this has been bubbling for a while, Rece. And the first I heard of this movement came in Mobile last year. So this would have been February of 2024. I was enjoying an evening libation at one of Mobile's finer establishments in that downtown area. And there was a group of college football coaches there, a couple head coaches, couple prominent coordinators. And they were all talking about this. And they were like, I don't think there's going to be spring games anymore. I don't think we can't have spring games because the coaches really don't like the post-spring portal, right? Because, especially at the higher level, because the guys who realize during spring ball that they're not going to get a ton of snaps in the fall bounce, and then they're very difficult to replace. They can't replace depth. So coaches tend to form decisions around what works best for them. And so part of the reveal that would let players know that they're not good enough to play there would be the spring game, would be at reps, be production, that is sort of when the sunlight comes and says to you, this is your value to the program. And so what was suggested to me that night, and appears to be trending that way, was a movement towards OTAs. Nobody wins or loses a job in OTAs in the same way you can when you all of a sudden are like, oh, I'm the third tight end in the game. Okay, I'm not playing until the third quarter at right guard. Well, I'm going to go from Ohio State to Cincinnati where I can start, whatever it is. So I do think the convenient thing for coaches to say is, I don't want my guys to get poached, which is true, right? You flash out in a spring game, somebody needs a corner. You got dudes grinding ESPN 3 game films of Sunbelt spring games to fill needs. Those jobs are on those staff. That's real life. So the coaches can say they don't want to get poached, but they really don't want guys to leave because the roster reality is there. So I think it's a combination of those two things, and that's how we've gotten here. And look, the injury thing's real. Guys get hurt in spring games. And some springers are limited. Some springers are kind of goofy right now. This to me isn't some grand American tradition. If you're a hardcore fan, you love this spring game. You and I have watched a lot of spring games in our life, Rece. I don't think we're going to have a period of mourning. Honestly, it's like a nice little treat to talk about in the summer if you're a fan. Hey man, that guy had 132 yards receiving in the spring game. It is dollops of hope before you don't see the players until summer camp.
I do feel badly for some of the fans who really enjoy it, but I also think that if you are going to go watch a spring game, which the main reason you're going is to see the players, see the new guy, see the recruit that you're excited about who enrolled early or whatever. You can do a lot of those same types of things if they just open up some type of fan day, open up some type of practice at the end, which my guess is that most will end up doing. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's what Ohio State is planning to do. Right? You do things like that, and you'll fill some of that void for the fans. But the injury thing was also real because remember, I think he wasn't the only one to do it, but Dabo a few years ago started doing the spring practice, spring game early in anticipation that inevitably someone is going to get hurt. Yeah. And it gives them more recovery time. Obviously, they hoped it wouldn't happen, but if it did, their players have more recovery time before fall camp opens. So there are a lot of factors. Injury prevention's probably part of it, and everything centers around in college sports right now around how do you get your players? How do you keep your players? How do you keep your players from leaving? So, I don't think this is the worst thing. And it might even evolve once we get to collective bargaining that you have a specified number of actual organized team activities where it's, not just the quarterback running the 7-on-7s like in the old days. And you have periods along the way where you're practicing, basically, even if you're practicing in, shorts or whatever.
Yeah, I just think as college sports get professionalized, I think we've been very overt on this podcast that we cover professional sports now, and we have for a long time. We've just been saying it out loud for the last few years, Rece. Like, this is a step towards professionalism. The college football is starting to look more like the NFL. There's NFL front offices. There's a bunch of things that are NFL like about college football right now, and this is just another evolution. I think the biggest reverberation for this for me is that it will cut short my sideline reporting career. I had a long and indistinguished career as ESPN's ugliest sideline reporter for spring games, and I may not get that opportunity anymore. So I'm gonna have to press for that.
No, we'll see what happens. Maybe we can find a spot for you in some real games. Get you banging around down there around the injury tent during the middle of the game.
We'll do it. There still are going to be a bunch of spring games, though.
Oh yeah, it's not that they're all going away. What do you say? 3 years, the spring game will be the rarity, probably.
That's
the
fair.
teams that go ahead and play the spring game
That's
will be. I don't know that they'll go away completely in the foreseeable future. Someone will see the advantage somewhere of playing a spring game, and they'll continue to do it, or they'll go away from it and they'll bring it back or something. But that's probably the trend. Well, one thing we know that is going to continue to happen in the spring for the foreseeable future and probably forever is the NFL Draft Combine. It starts this week. Number of college stars going in trying to improve their situations before the draft happens in late April in Green Bay. And for more on that now is one of our NFL draft experts. I spent day 3 with him at the NFL draft, and he's a fountain of information there. The great Matt Miller, kind enough to join us. Matt, in reading your most recent article, you have a first-round grade for fewer players than the norm. How would you describe this draft in terms of strength and in terms of depth?
Yeah, it's not the sexiest draft at the top. I have 12 first-round grades. That's 12 guys who would be drafted in the first round over the past 5 years, putting them into the mixer and say, okay, you're a true first-round pick. I think that number will expand. The more I get into this draft, the more I like it. And I think the strengths that you mentioned, defensive end is great. We're going to see a ton of those guys come off the board in the first and second round. Defensive tackle, this is as good of a group of defensive tackle as I can remember. I love the tight end class, and we're going to see, Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland are two of my favorite players in the country. And then I think the running back class, we have a chance to see a record number of running backs drafted. 30 is the record. That was 2017. And we might see that tied or surpassed this year. So, no, it's not
30
quarterback, 30 running backs, Pete. Not great at quarterback, not great at wide receiver, but I do think there are core team building positions, in the trenches, especially. This is a great draft for it.
I think the collision of the lack of high-end talent combined with the lack of quarterback talent, to me, in my very non-expert draft opinion, make it the seeds for a volatile draft, right? Like a lot of guys could be moving because you're going to be targeted because there's so few guys. Do you see the early signs of chaotic draft day, Matt?
I think chaotic in the sense of guys will be drafted much earlier than we, as the experts, and I'm air quoting for those listening, than we expect. And it reminds me, you remember, was it 2023, Jahmyr Gibbs went like 12 to Detroit, and we were all that's way too early for a running back. Well, it's worked out great.
Or not.
But it's also, so I think it will be one of those years where, because there's not a lot of blue chip players, those guys, 4 or 5 blue chippers, they're going to come off the board quick. We'll get the 2 quarterbacks off the board quick. And then I think we're going to have 20 players that teams basically have the same grade on. And so I do think it'll be volatile in that way. I don't expect a ton of trading up the board just because there's not a lot of quarterbacks. There's not a lot of left tackles. There's not a lot of wide receivers. Those are the positions we usually see movement for. But I do think volatile in the sense of, could a Marion Hampton go in the top 20? Yeah, absolutely. Could we not see a true wide receiver drafted until the 20s? Absolutely. So I think in that sense, you'll want to buckle up for Thursday night because it could be pretty wild.
Man, I do want to get to the quarterbacks because it's my favorite position in sports. It's the one that gets people in the NFL fired. But before that, from your evaluation, you draft Travis Hunter. Where are you playing him?
Wherever he wants, I think is the easy answer.
Are you going to try to on some level, and do you expect teams to try on some level to play him both ways?
I think, yes, I would. And I think, early in the process, I said, no, he's a wide receiver because I think you want the ball in his hands. That was my take early. I will say, having been on the road for the last month and talking to teams, my opinion has started to change because they say it's harder to find good corners than it is good receivers. We have to keep that aspect in mind. And it's easier to have a package of 10 plays on offense. You can't do that on defense. Like you can't moonlight on defense, basically. And so I think if you're going to let him play both ways, it has to be defense first, which is, from my understanding, also that's what Colorado did. He was seen at Colorado as a cornerback first, and you guys would know better than I if this story is wrong. He was a corner first who played wide receiver, and I think the NFL will follow that. But I do think when we get to Indy and people ask him, I hope the first question asked of Travis Hunter is, what position do you want to play in the NFL? Because ultimately that matters. And wide receivers make double what corners make. So he might come out and say, guys, I'm a wide receiver. I want to make $25 million a year very, very soon. Good corners make, 15, 12? So it is fascinating. But I would let him do whatever he wants, honestly.
The one thing, talking about the package on defense, and obviously his college coach, Deion Sanders, just played a little bit here and there on offense. But I do remember a story, perhaps fabricated or having been engaged in hyperbole over the years, of where Deion maybe was just joining a new team, maybe he was just coming back from baseball or whatever, and they were explaining the concept of this coverage to him. And he's listening, and he said, but I'm covering him. I got him. And they go, yeah, but he goes, but I got him. Okay, well, then you worry about the other 10. I've got him. And, so there's some of that on defense that if you chose to make him primarily a wide receiver that you could do with Travis Hunter and say, I'm going to make it up here. But, okay, we're sending him out. There's Jamar Chase. There's Justin Jefferson. You've got him. You cover him. And look, I know there are defensive coordinators, if they're listening to that, cringing at that very thought. But there's something to putting a guy out there who can just do that. But I agree with you. I think in theory, that's probably what will happen. Unless, of course, he wants to be the wide receiver and finances may drive that. And who could blame him if that's the case?
Oh, absolutely. I think it will matter team by team, right? Like if he goes to the Patriots, but you need a receiver more than you need a corner because they have Christian Gonzalez. And so I like, we're going to talk about it for the next 60 days, but I think it's really going to be driven post-draft by the team that selects him and where their actual needs might fall.
So Travis Hunter, to me, the most astounding stat in college football the last 10 years. He played 2,625 snaps in 2 seasons at Colorado. So that's 1,300 snaps.
And still missed time with the injury last year, 2 years ago. Excuse me.
In terms of just like the ability to play football on a game day, it's unlike anything we've ever seen. And quite frankly, it's not close just to have that. What's the word I'm looking for here? The resolve,
endurance, mental toughness. Yeah.
Thank you, Rece Davis. That's why you're the host of the show. Is it possible, like when you talk to teams, Matt, this is what I'm curious about. Can he keep this up like in some shape or fashion? Because that's just mind-blowing numbers.
That is the question. And you'll look at guys in the NFL, they routinely play 14 to 1,500 snaps a season, guys on defense especially. So like the conditioning that he has is rare. It's raved about. Yeah. I think the work ethic, the love of the game, those things are just, he should be applauded for that in and of itself. I do think there's going to be that concern in the NFL because he's not the biggest guy. 6'1", 185 is what he's listed at. I think that's probably in pads, the 185. I've stood next to him and I'm about 5'10 and a half, 180, and we looked about the same size. So it'll be curious to see what he actually weighs in at. But I think he could keep it up, at least early on. I don't think we're going to see a 30-year-old Travis Hunter playing nickel corner and slot receiver. But I certainly think early in his rookie contract, which is 4 to 5 years, yeah, you're going to try to get your money's worth as an NFL team. And if he wants to play 2,000 snaps a season, he has shown the ability to do that.
You know what the interesting thing is? Generally speaking, fewer snaps in an NFL game than in a college game. And while colleges have evolved in terms of what they do during the week in preparation, I think from a physically demanding standpoint, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, practices in the NFL, they're not necessarily going through a bloody Tuesday, that you see often at the college level. Now, the games, because those are grown men with a lot of violence out there, the games, even as tough and as hard as the college game is, the NFL games are going to be, far more taxing to get through. But there are some things that could mitigate some of the wear and tear on him in terms of the restrictions that the NFL has in terms of how much you can hit, how often you wear pads. All of those types of things might, in theory, help him in the early part of his career be able to withstand the wear and tear of playing a little bit on both sides of the ball.
It reminds me a lot of the Jaden Daniels conversation last year where people said, oh, he's too skinny. He's going to get killed in the NFL. Well, he was fine because the NFL protects its players more. And even some of the hits that Travis took in college last year, or that his teammate Shedeur Sanders took last year, they're not going to get hit like that in the NFL because it's against the law. The NFL, they won't let that happen, basically. You'll be fined and penalized and kicked out of games for some of those hits. So I do think from that perspective of, man, he's this rail thin wide receiver. He's going to be more protected in the NFL. And I do think that goes back to the conversation about which position he plays. At receiver, you're much more protected. At corner, you have to go out and initiate that contact. You have to be that enforcer. That was part of my initial argument of why he should play offense was I don't really want that body type slamming into DK Metcalf 10 times a game. That's not what's going to be best for his long-term health. So it is, but it's going to be fascinating to just see how it plays out.
Before we get into quarterbacks, which we need to do, can I just ask about one player? There's like one player in every draft that shows up on a board, and I'm like, where did he come from? Like, how did I just completely miss him covering college football? And Rece, maybe you were dialed into this guy and I missed him, but the UCLA linebacker, Carson Schlesinger, I believe is how you say it.
Yep.
Like, I have to admit, I saw him on, maybe it was your top 50, maybe it was Field, maybe it was Jordan Reed. But I saw him like a couple weeks ago and I was like, whoa, like blindsided. Never heard of the guy. Bring me up to date on his story, man.
Yeah, so I got tipped off in November by a scout about him, and they said, this guy has a shot to go first round. You need to get on him. I was like, this year? Like, you do that? The 2025 draft? Former walk-on, worked his way into the starting lineup and then just racked up the stats in the awards this past year. He's undersized. He's 6'2", 225. He's not, the guy that's going to go out and run a 4.4, but he's really fluid. He sees the ball well, super instinctive, and he has a shot to be the first linebacker off the board. It's him and Jihad Campbell from Alabama. They're the two guys, and I think both will be drafted in the top 40. Campbell's just you guys have seen him in person. He's a different animal out there. He'll probably go in the top 20, but Schlesinger is certainly in that same category and in the mix.
So let's turn it to quarterbacks then and back to Colorado and Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. You and I were having a conversation just before we started the podcast when I first saw Shedeur Sanders. It was at Jackson State, and I've told this story on the podcast before, and I was underwhelmed. I was like, all he does is throw hitches and bubbles. He really doesn't, run great or anything like that. But then over the time in Colorado, I watched him make some terrific throws, watched him, while he's not going to run away from a lot of guys, he will buy time. And I'm more of a believer now than I was initially, yet I still have some reservation. None of those reservations center around the fact that he is tough as heck. I mean, he's mentally tough. He'll take a shot. He's, this idea maybe that he grew up with some type of silver spoon because, of his dad. Well, that hasn't affected his toughness, man. That dude's tough. Doesn't guarantee he'll be a big-time franchise-type quarterback. How do you evaluate Shedeur?
He is a tough evaluation, and I'm with you. When he got to Colorado, I said, okay, well, let's see it now. Let's see it against, the Pac-12 and against, the bigger conferences. And there was no drop-off in play. In fact, I think he ascended. He got better. You can see that he's developing, which is huge for scouting a player. You want to see year-to-year growth. He has certainly shown that. He is tough as all get out. I was at the Kansas game where it felt like the Jayhawks wanted to get in his head, and they certainly got in his face. They were late with some hits, and it never really affected him. He didn't get caught up in it. He rose to the challenge. I think he plays with a chip on his shoulder. So instead of it being, okay, he's the son of a Hall of Famer, everything's been given to him, it's almost like it works in the reverse of, I'm going to prove that I belong on my own. The evaluation is tough because he's not the biggest guy. He's listed at barely over 6'1". He was listed at about 200 pounds. I had the chance to see him about a month ago at the East-West Shrine game. He looks like he's put on some good weight. He certainly looks stronger. He did not weigh in there. I'm skeptical that he'll weigh in at the combine. We know he's not throwing, but he's a tough eval because the arm strength is average to good. The athleticism is average to good. Size is average to good. So everything that he does that makes him a great quarterback is the feel for where his guys are at, the toughness, and he's just very, very accurate. The football goes where he wants it to go. I think the hard part is, he picked up some bad habits in 2023 behind a terrible offensive line. He loves to wait. Some of that toughness that we see is because he's holding on to the ball too long. So he's going to have to learn to climb the pocket and throw that thing on time. And that's where I think, play action offense would help him do some things to get him back on time as a passer. But he has shown growth, and I think that's what you want to see. Now, I'm lower on him than folks like Mel Kiper and Field Yates and Jordan Reed. I have a number 24 on my board. I'm also one of those guys. I'm not going to put a quarterback in the top 5 just because they're drafted in the top 5. Our player rankings are who's the best, and you stack it that way. But I think situation matters for every quarterback. Obviously, it's going to matter a lot for him. He can't go somewhere where he has to be, he can't elevate the team. This isn't Jaden Daniels. He needs to go somewhere where he can be a point guard.
Shedeur is fascinating, right? In so many ways. And I appreciate your judiciousness and prudence in not putting a quarterback there in the top 5, just because that's, that's what tradition dictates, right? Or what history dictates. Generally, Matt, there's a soul-crushing need in the NFL for starting quarterbacks. And this draft is probably the worst quarterback draft we've had. It's maybe like 1 out of every 10 years, right? So how do you see that collision playing out? Could we only see 2 first-round quarterbacks? Could we see these guys? Could we see like the Raiders, who obviously need a quarterback? Could we see them trade down and like dare people to take these guys? Because part of me wonders, like, if there is going to be a judiciousness there, because I don't feel like the NFL has a heavy appetite for this class.
I agree with that. And a big part of my job is talking to teams and then relaying it to the public, right? The buzz that you want to hear isn't there. And it's like it's there a little bit about Cam Ward from Miami. It's a tiny bit about Shedeur Sanders. It's not there about anyone else, to the point that, and no disrespect to the Jackson Darts of the world or Tyler Shuck or Quinn Ewers, but we're so reaching for who's that third quarterback going to be, and could a third quarterback get into the first round? And I think the bigger question is, are we sure there's going to be 2 in the top 10? Could Shedeur fall? Could he be more likely in the teens? I do think that's possible. And this week at the combine, I think the job for him is he needs someone to fall in love with him. He needs the Browns or the Raiders or the Jets or the Saints to fall in love with him, basically. Or we could see a tumble to where maybe he is available later than we expected, and it's realistic for the Steelers or realistic for the Rams to grab him as the quarterback of the future. So that's where the pressure would be for Sanders. But I'm with you, Pete. This class doesn't feel like one that's loved by NFL teams. And I think because of what happened in 2021, 5 quarterbacks were drafted in the top 15. Trevor Lawrence is the only one still on that team, the original team that drafted him. 2022 was Kenny Pickett, only first-round quarterback. I think because of those 2 drafts, teams are a little more skittish about, let's just throw a first-round pick at the quarterback, and if we get it wrong, we'll do it again, because it sets you back so far. So that it will be, I think, fascinating to see how that plays out in round 1. Are we putting Shedeur in the top 5 because it's what's expected? Or are we saying he's going to be drafted in the top 5 because that's actually what will happen? That's one of the big questions right now.
What about Cam Ward?
I like Cam Ward a lot. I think with Cam, the difference with Cam and Shedeur is he gives you a little bit more of that dynamic ability, the arm strength. He can create on the move. He can adjust his arm angle to find the passing windows. a lot like Shedeur, he's elevated his game everywhere he's been. Incarnate Ward, Washington State, Miami, every place got better. And I think as a scout, that's what you want to see, that development over time. And then you put him in your system and say, okay, how much better can he get? I think with Cam, it's again, he's going to need coached hard because he's got some flaws in his game. He's a little bit too relaxed in the pocket at times, and that leads to sacks. I know he only had 10 turnovers total this year. He doesn't turn the ball over a ton, but man, he will wait in the pocket as long as humanly possible to throw the ball. And there are times where I've watched his tape and thought, did they blow the whistle? Like, because he's just standing back there in the pocket, and then he'll uncork one for 40 yards. So he's also going to have to learn to speed his game up.
The other thing interesting about watching him to me is like when he scrambles, he runs just fast enough not to get hit. You know, it's like he'll head to the sideline, and it's almost like he's taunting people. You're not going to get here in time to hit me. Not quite enough. If there is, we've kept you longer than we promised we would, Matt. So give me one other quarterback. And Pete, you can chime in here too, and I'll do the same. Give me one quarterback unlikely to be drafted in the first round, but if you had to take a guy and say, I think he's going to make it, I think he's going to be a good starter in the NFL, who would it be?
Let me cover up my Texas helmet over here on the side. I'll take Will Howard, honestly. I know Pete thought I was going to go Quinn Ewers here, but I'll take Will Howard again.
Matt loves him some Quinn Ewers.
I do. I love me. I'm not letting go of the dream just yet on Quinn Ewers. With Will Howard, though, I think we saw him improve so much under Chip Kelly. He loosened up his game. I remember watching him at Kansas State and thought, like, there might be a position change in the future for him just because you love his toughness and his athletic ability. But as a pure passer, he took a gigantic leap this year. So if I had to say late round 3, give me a guy that I could go win some games with, I would take Will Howard.
Instead of giving an answer, I'm going to ask a question. Last year, we had a glaring lack of middle class of quarterbacks, right? It was an anomalous year. We had 6 go in the top 12, and then we didn't have one go until Spencer Rattler, and this is going to be off the top of my head, but it was somewhere in like the 150s, right?
Yep.
So, and again, it's understandable, right? It's such a premium position. You're going to put your eggs in a basket. Do we see more of a middle class this year, Matt? And I think the philosophy of when do you draft a backup comes into play here, right? Some teams might draft one a third. Like, walk us through how you might see this very good next tier of Jackson Darts, Kyle McCords. Jalen Milroe is a fascinating risk to take, right? Dillon Gabriel, Will Howard, Tyler Shuck, your boy Quinn. How do you see teams, if they don't put a premium on these guys, sort of settling in, and where could we see a run on them?
So the NFL has really moved to this idea, like you said, there's no middle class. You're either good enough to go in the first round or you're a backup and you go on day 3. Like the round 2 and 3 quarterback is kind of becoming extinct. This year, I think we'll change that because, like Jackson Dart, he's a good quarterback and he could maybe become a starter, but he's not one yet, right? And so that's probably a round 2 quarterback traditionally. Quinn Ewers is healthy now. He's going to throw at the combine. Let's see what that looks like. But 3 years ago, he was the greatest quarterback recruit of all time. So there's still some talent there that I think teams will get excited about. Same with Milroe. Then you've got the late bloomers like Shuck, McCord, Howard. So I do think we'll see more of that middle class because it feels like we just talked about 7 quarterbacks who all could be starters. So I think we see more of that middle class. And then, day 3, you get into like Dillon Gabriel probably goes early day 3 just because he's so undersized, but he's, really accurate and he's had a ton of success. And you get into more of that group on day 3. So we might not see as many like we did last year. We saw a lot of late round quarterbacks because they were, hey, this guy's going to be a QB3 forever. I think this year we see fewer of that because all the guys, could ascend to a starter level at some point.
Can I make a prediction, Rece, quickly?
Yeah.
Quinn Ewers rocks Indy because that man throws a beautiful ball. Like a beautiful ball. And on air, Quinn's going to look good.
He could be positively Jeff Georgian.
Yes.
In the combine. The mother of all combine workouts for Jeff George, who threw as beautiful a ball as anyone ever threw in the NFL. I will say, I think all the predictions are good. And if you were going with prototype size, specialty skills, you'd probably go Howard, Milroe as being there, although I have concerns about Milroe as a passer. I know he's way undersized. I know it will probably crush him in the NFL in terms of ever becoming the starter. I like Dillon Gabriel, man. I really do. I know he's small. But I feel like, if you got him in the right place, in the right system, that he'd win games for you.
He's going to go to Miami, and Tua will get hurt again, and Dillon Gabriel will go like 3-0 in his backup. And people will remember that was Rece Davis's guy, was Dillon Gabriel.
Why are you wishing harm on Tua?
Oh, I would never wish.
On, man.
Just
Come
historically
on.
speaking, Tua's probably going to miss a game or two. Drafting a good backup is important there.
And there would be a lot of similarities there with Tua and Dillon Gabriel if they were to go. Like I even joked with Nick Saban when we did a film on Dillon Gabriel this year. You've got to type the lefty wide quarterbacks. You sort of like those guys. Matt,
Right.
A pleasure, man. I look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks for all the great work. Appreciate you being with us.
You bet, guys. Thank you.
Matt Starr continues to ascend as one of the leading experts on the NFL draft, and I look forward to seeing him soon, and we'll continue to visit with him on the pod. Pete, our producer Adrian suggested that we become men of the people and start answering some internet questions from time to time. I don't know exactly what type of sites that Adrian frequents because we got a lot of Reddits on here.
That's a rabbit hole.
Okay, so let's go back to something we were talking about earlier. We sort of opened the podcast talking about the potential demise, or at least the lessening of importance or attention on spring games, which one of the reasons for that is NIL, and poaching is an aspect of it. So a Reddit user named WLane13, don't know if it's from Oxford, Mississippi or not, with the name Lane in there. But at any rate, so what is the NIL situation like for guys at smaller schools who were not even on really a mid-tier team? If they're on, and I would take this to mean if you're in the Sun Belt, if you're at a level like that, what's the NIL situation there for most of those guys?
So I would say at like the Sun Belt level, Rece, if you're a star, you're probably between 50 and 75 grand, something like that. Now, look, Memphis is an anomaly, right? Tulane's paid a couple guys. So if you're at the high end of the group of five, you can still probably make some real money. And look, the reason why, if you're a all conference player, a starting player in the Sun Belt, you end up as a backup at Auburn, right? Is because they can pay you 200 grand to be a backup or 100 grand to be a backup. And now this stuff with all the NFL capology stuff is all structured. We need our third safety to make this. If we're going to pay this, it's all quantified. If you're a star player, like, Candle's been able to pay some guys a decent amount of money at Toledo to stay. They're going to have a couple guys drafted again this year. They got the big D tackle. They got Maxon Hooker, the safety. And I think if you're at that level, you have enough money to prioritize a handful of guys, pay them a decent amount of money, and you could pay them in the highest currency possible in college football, snaps. Mm-hmm. And that can't be overstated. I can't say how many guys go chase the money and come up, don't play, and then go back down. And again, the snaps, the experience, the production is all priceless. Look at Ashton Jeanty. He is the shining example. I would guess Ashton Jeanty made around six figures at Boise. But I don't think it was nearly what he would have been able to make if he had gone to Kentucky, metaphorically.
And he had opportunities, and he had people pursuing him to do that. One of the things that I hear coaches complain about in that regard from time to time that does offend my nostalgic sensibilities along with them as well, you're treating some of these schools like minor leagues. Well, if it's professional sports, which it is, that's kind of what they are. So when you have a chance to move up a level, when you get a chance to go from AA to AAA or from AA to the majors, you go. And because of that, and you have guys sent down, to regard to get that currency of snaps. It is just further evidence of the professionalization of it. Like you mentioned earlier, that we haven't shied away from that. It's what it is. Everything comes with the trade-off, right? And it is great to me nostalgically for Ashton Jeanty to stay. It is hypocritical of me to say he should stay.
Correct.
I don't
I
think
agree 1,000%. That's the perfect way to say it.
Yeah, I don't think he should stay. I like it when he chooses to because he has an affinity for that. And all of the things that coaches say about not having a place to go back to, all those things are true. Yeah. And again, that is part of the cost. When you do it, if you choose to go to, 4 schools in your college career, maybe you don't really have a home 5-6 years from now, a place where you really feel like that there's some tie and some, emotional connection with when you go back. That's part of the cost. And that's okay. And I think each individual gets to choose what's important to him, whether they stay or go. This coming from another Reddit person, Royal Confetti 5, asking about data on NIL. Said he's heard that Oregon and Ohio State have the most expensive rosters, having trouble finding the data. Anecdotally speaking, everybody talked a lot about the $20 million that Ohio State spent. I think Oregon was right in that neighborhood too. And given what Oregon is planning to do this year, $20 million is going to not keep you right at the top anymore.
So, Rece, we're at like a really interesting moment right now in NIL spending because the spending formerly known as NIL, after Judge Wilkins' expected passing of the rev share in April, will become now actual schools paying players for the first time, which is historic and kind of cool, really, when you look at the evolution of the sport that we cover. But all the places that had NIL kitties have been wildly overspending this spring because they may not be able to spend with this new Deloitte enforcement situation in the way. So what we've had is a wildly flooded market. It is a great time to be a college free agent this spring because the market has been filled with money and filled with opportunity and filled with people who actually have to spend the money because they don't know if they're going to be able to spend it in the same way in the next iteration of this, meaning come June 1st, July 1st, wherever it is, we have that. So, I mean, look, the people who spend are going to spend, right? Like that is what it is. It's not, it's not like that. It's to me, you look at Texas Tech, for example, they're supposed to be spending, what was the number in Max Olson's story the other day, Rece? It was somewhere around 25 million, right?
Yeah, between 25 and 30, I think, somewhere there. Yeah. There's talk that Oregon was going to be over 30. I mean, some of this gets inflated with word of mouth and things like that, but, wouldn't be surprised if numbers are pretty accurate.
Yeah, so it's a boom time right now to be a college football player. And look, the sport has never been better, Rece. Like the product on the field, the ratings are bananas. There are problems, and this is problem season we're in right now, right? Like we're in problems for what the next playoff is going to look like. We're in problems. Spring games are changing. Like this is the time of year where we dwell on the issues, as we should, by the way. Like we shouldn't ignore them, but like in the macro, things are pretty good, and you could argue have never been better in college football.
Well, one of the questions he asked was, why is the NIL data hard to find? It's because it doesn't have to be a matter of public record, right?
Correct. Yeah, it doesn't exist. I spent a lot of time talking to people about that, and there's some distraction and diversion there. So
I had, and I'm not going to say who, but I had a prominent booster at a Power 4 thing, and one of the things people talk about is donor fatigue, and he was hit up and acquiesced in, I think, last year, maybe for, like you were talking about earlier, coming up, we've got to have this particular player for this particular position. He increased his giving and got in play. Yeah. And, said they had to have him, and he was like, and this guy was like, I'm done. He said, I'm done with this. It's taking the fun out of it for me. And he said, he goes, I'll do something else to give in a different way. And look,
remember the movie Boiler Room, Rece?
I don't.
It's a movie about the stock market where they like hard sell people into bad investments. And it's like the guy's under his desk being like, we really need a right guard. We really need a right guard. We need this right guard. You got to have this right guard. Like that. It's like, what a terrible sales pitch to go to these wealthy donors who've offered their support for years and say, hey, here's this guy. We absolutely need him. And in your heart, he may not play. It's just like it's bad business.
Yeah.
To alienate people worth, millions for a short-term thing. Like it never made any sense to outsource the payment of the players. Just never did. And it was
and
not
you
going
know-
to last.
And the other thing too, and I don't want to go down this one yet, but just to throw it out there, the whole Deloitte oversight and enforcement, can't you just smell the lawsuit coming? I mean, if we don't, if we don't figure out who's going to bargain on each side, and I've said for years, got to figure out who bargains for the players. We have to figure out who's going to bargain for the sport, because I don't think they're going to hand that over to the NCAA. In fact, I know with 99% certainty, I would say they don't want to do that without some type of construct to limit the NCAA's influence on college football. But anyway, that's part of it. Okay, well, let's wrap up with this one because it's directed at you and it speaks to competition on the field. You had a post on X about Tennessee and Nebraska canceling their upcoming series, and the question from BBB, I don't know if that's Big Blue Basketball or just Triple B Communications, why not flip the games? If you need a home game in 27, just flip the venues and play in Knoxville in 26 and Lincoln in 27. So the accusation here is it just sounds like a lame excuse for not wanting to play the game.
Well, Tennessee's home schedule probably wouldn't afford that flip. Probably doesn't have the room for that flip. I would guess, Rece. But I think this just comes down to Nebraska didn't want to play this series, and look, the one piece of empirical evidence we have of this 12-team playoff indicates murky rewards for a tough non-conference schedule.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the data set we're dealing with right now. Now, look, you and I have said this many times on this podcast. We're not biased towards teams. We're not biased towards leagues, but we really like good games. Like we are not, USC, Utah Valley is not what gets us excited, right? Like that just doesn't, we want teams to play good games. And I don't think that shows any particular bias other than we are fans at heart and we like watching great college football. And Nebraska Bowling Green in Nebraska, I forget who else, is not great college football. So, but I can't fault the strategy with the evidence we have.
Right. And, who knows, with all of these meetings between the SEC and the Big Ten and then the college football playoff at large and talk of potential scheduling agreements between those two conferences, maybe you get Tennessee, Nebraska anyway. You never know. If they make some type of scheduling agreement between the two, Yeah.
Well, like we said, Rece, if this is all going to come together, it's going to come together with dominoes. First, you have to figure out what the playoff looks like. If the playoff does have the 4 automatic qualifiers, controversial, but seemingly the desire of the Big Ten for certain in the SEC is burgeoning. If you have that, then you can play more conference games, right? In the SEC, you can go to 9 because you then have your automatic qualifiers, so more conference losses don't impact you. And then you could even go play out of conference, because if you have 4 automatic qualifiers that are dictated by your league standings only, losses out of league won't matter. So all of those things have to happen in that sequence for them to happen. I feel confident the first 2 will happen in the next 6 weeks or so. The third one, I'm not sure of, but you could see the groundwork being laid to get there.
I'm not there on automatic qualifiers yet because I think it takes away from the overall picture of the sport and the access to it. And there will be years, plenty of years, when the Big Ten needs to get 5 or 6, and they don't, because you have all of these automatic qualifications, at least that number of them. Now, I know what people are saying. They're saying they want 4. Of course they would get them. Yes, they would get the 4, but the 5 or 6 might get left out because of the other automatic bids that they are guaranteed to have. But I do think that it might be time to at least consider, and boy, wait till you hear the buzz on this one. It might be time, as much as I like the committee and think they've done a good job, maybe you come up with the very best metric that you possibly can come up with that will not unduly penalize difficult schedules. In fact, would reward them, would evaluate how each game is played. And that doesn't have to be the be-all, end-all, but maybe it is the guiding principle for selecting teams into the playoff. And then there might not be need for automatic bids. But there's a lot of time to discuss such things. There in the precious present, I think you're headed to the draft combine, are you not?
I am. I'm going to drop through there. I'm going to make a couple college stops on my way, Rece, see some friends in our state of Indiana, so we can talk about that next week too. Then we'll be going to Gainesville for hoops this weekend. Excited to see the Gators.
The Gators, who might, as good as Auburn is, and I've said from the beginning that I think that Auburn's the best team I've seen. Florida beat them in Auburn, and Florida has had trouble staying at full strength, and yet they continue to beat everybody in their path. So I think the Gators are really good national championship contender. Look forward to seeing them for College Game Day. First time we've been to Gainesville in quite some time for College Game Day basketball. Going to take in a Florida-Miami baseball game on Friday night that you are invited to come see if you'd like to come. So that'd be a little rivalry for that. So this ought to be a fun weekend, and looking forward to more talk about the draft, more talk about these meetings, and of course we're getting closer and closer to March Madness. Thanks for listening to the College Game Day podcast. We encourage you to subscribe so you never miss an episode, or download wherever you prefer to get your podcasts.